Okay, we're going to go over an example, actually the example from the book. We'll take a look here. So we're going to start with example number one. Example number one gives us a data set. Sample data set lists the number of minutes 50 internet subscribers spent on the internet during their most recent session. Construct a frequency distribution that has 7 classes. Okay, scrolling back here, frequency distribution is nothing more than a table that splits our data up into groupings, or what we call classes. Okay, we then count how many data entries fall into each group. So we're separating, and we're really looking for trends in our data set to see where our data is grouped. Okay. There's some guidelines here. You can read through those on your own. For the purposes of this course, the number of classes will always be given to you. But again, if you have too few classes, you just have a small number of very large, tall bars on your charts when you make your charts. If you have too many classes, then your data kind of gets watered down, and it's really tough to identify any trends in the data. So let's use the numbers in here of 5 to 20. But for us right now, I'm always going to give you a number of classes. So this question here tells us we want to construct a frequency distribution using 7 classes. And they tell us that the way we are going to approach this is to start by calculating what we call a class width. We want to find out how big each of these groups are going to be. And there's an equation for that. Take our maximum data entry and our minimum data entry and subtract them, and then divide that by how many classes we have. So we're finding the range of our data from the lowest number to the highest number, how much space we have in our data set, and we are going to divide that by how many classes we want to use. Key here, you're going to get decimal values. It says round up to 12. Even if this came out to a whole number, I would suggest you round it up to the next highest whole number. No matter what, you are always going to round up. If you get 11.01, you're going to round it up to 12. Okay? You're never going to round that number down. So what I've done for you is I have a spreadsheet here where I've already input that entire data set. And we know N is the size of our data set, 50 data values. We know we need 7 classes. So the first thing we want to do is we want to calculate that class width. Class width is sometimes referred to as bin size or bucket size, depending on different technology tools you might use. Google Sheets, where I am right now, is going to call it a bucket. Something like Desmos is going to call it a bin. So before we can do that, we need to find our max and our min value. And there's a number of ways you could do it. If it's a small data set, you can just go ahead and you can scroll right through it and just try and pick out the highest and lowest numbers. Google Sheets is really nice though. We type the equal sign and type max, parenthesis, find the maximum value, okay? Or you could just go ahead here and click this. We want to find the max and highlight your data set just by clicking on it and then dragging down. Got all 50 data values here. Close the parentheses and hit enter. You will see that it found it for us. It found that it's 88. Same thing, equals min, parenthesis, and again, drag and highlight that same data set. Close the parenthesis and hit enter. And it should give us 7. So we know our maximum and minimum numbers, okay? Once we have those numbers, we want to subtract those numbers and divide by 7 classes. And the wonderful thing about using Google Sheets is you don't have to do these calculations in your head. You don't have to do them with a calculator. You could just type in what you want it to do. Equals, parentheses, we can type in 88 minus 7, or you can click on the cell that you want it to utilize. This number minus this number, close your parentheses, and divide it by 7 classes. And you can see we got the same 11.57 that the textbook showed us as the answer back here. Okay, and we're also going to round that number to 12. So you see I created title here for calculated width, and next to it I have the rounded width. We're going to use 12 as the width of our classes. Next step is, where do we start our first class? Our first class limit. We always start at our lowest data value. We know that our lowest data value was this 7 right here. And from there, we're going to calculate all of these lower, what we would call the lower class limits. We're creating a group that goes from 7 to some number, and then the next group that starts and goes to some number. So the easy way to do this, because we calculated that rounded class width right here, is once we put in our lowest data value, we're going to go to our next cell, and we're just going to type equals the number above it plus 12, our class width. And it gives us the next number for our class limits. And we're going to take that, right here, we're going to grab this corner by just holding down, clicking and holding, and dragging it down. We need 7 classes, so we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we've got all of those numbers. Next thing, think about it. If this group here starts at a number of 19, where did the previous group have to end? If this one starts at 19, the previous one had to end at 18. And again, we'll come in here, we'll type equals the number above it by just clicking on that cell that contains the 18 and adding our class width. And we will drag and drop that all the way down. And there we have completed our class limits for all of these classes. We'll go back and double check. Look at the ones they have here: 7 to 18, 19 to 30, 31 to 42, and so on, all the way up to 79 to 90. We've created the correct classes. Okay, so that wasn't that difficult. Next thing we want to do, we have this column in here for class boundaries. We're going to hold off on that for right now, because that really doesn't come into play until a little bit later. You can see I highlighted these 2 cells here in red because those are the reason we need class boundaries. They're very important. We want to calculate how many data values fall from 7 to 18 inclusive. That's going to be our frequency column. Easiest way to do that, come over here to your data set, highlight your data. Up here under this tab for data, we will see right here, sort the range we've highlighted, column A, from A to Z. That means ascending order. We're going to sort it from lowest value to highest value. So as soon as we click on that, it has automatically sorted all that data from lowest value all the way to highest value. That's going to make it very easy for us to count now. We want all the values from 7 to 18. So I'll just come over here and highlight all the values from 7 to 18 and count how many we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values. Our frequency here is 6. Next, we want everything from 19 to 30. Here's all our 19 through 30. Count how many you have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 values. Frequency is 10. There are some functions you can use, some calculations that Sheets will do this for you faster. I don't want to jump into that because I don't want to have you doing everything new, brand new all at once. So for right now, we're just going to go through and count 31 to 42. Just come over here to your data, highlight 31 through 42. There it is. And we want to count how many cells we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 43 to 54. There's no 43 value. That's okay. We just go to the next one. 43 through 54. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 values. 55 to 66. Start here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values. '67 through '78. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values there. I think I was off on that last one. Did I count incorrectly on that last one? 55 through 66. I better double check that. Always double check. 55 through 66. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, I'm counting wrong. 55 through 50. We're starting here. 1, 2, 3, 4. That should have been 5 values. And our next group was 67, 78. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That one has 6. That sounds more correct. And the last one, which is 79 to 90, I think only has 2 values. So 80 and 82. So that only is going to have 2 values. If you want to double check here, we can just jump back to our chart and see 6, 10, 13, 8, 5, 6, 2. That's correct. It also tells us down here at the bottom, check that the sum of the frequencies equals the number of data values you have. Easy way to do that in Google Sheets is to just come in here, type equals sum, parenthesis, and go ahead and highlight those values and hit enter. And you will see that the sum here, I'll type the word sum. Sum is equal to 50. So we know we got our frequencies correct because these numbers all add up to how many data values we had in the first place. So we're good so far. We've got our classes set up. We calculate our frequencies correctly. Our next step is to calculate these next things on the chart, which is called the midpoints. Midpoints, if you can go back to geometry and remember how you did it in geometry, it's really just the average of 2 numbers. In our case, we're talking about the class limit. So we're going to want to add this 7 to this 18 and divide by 2. You're just averaging these 2 numbers. You want to find what the middle value is between 7 and 18. You could do that in your head. 7 plus 18 is 25, divided by 2 is 12.5. Or you can let your technology do the work for you. Equals, parenthesis, this number plus this number, close, divided by 2, and get 12.5. And the reason I like doing that here in the Google Sheet is because when I drag this down, it's just going to move to the next row. It's going to use 19 plus 30 divided by 2. We just drag it down. We'll get the next number. There we go. And drag it all the way down the list. So you found all of your midpoints. If you click on any one of these individually, you can see your equation shows up here in the equation bar. E7 plus F7. Okay. Column E, row 7 plus F7 divided by 2 gives us this 36.5. So you can very quickly calculate all these midpoints and let the technology do the work for you. The next column, relative frequency. Let's jump back here and look at the definition of relative frequency. And I think I just skipped over it. Here we go. So we have midpoint. We know is the middle, lower class plus upper class limit divided by 2. Relative frequency of a class is the portion or percentage of the data that falls into that class. Very simple calculation. It's the frequency for an individual class divided by the total sample size, which in our case was 50 data values. So all we need to do is come in here and tell us equals our frequency, which in this case is 6, but we're just going to click on that cell, 6 divided by 50. And it gives us 0.12, which is correct. And since we used, by clicking on that cell, instead of typing in the number 6, by clicking on this cell, We've associated this column divided by 50 to give us this answer. So when we drag it down to the next one, it will use the next cell in line, 10 divided by 50. And there it is. It did the calculation for you. Click on it, it says, I used I6 and divided by 50. Drag it all the way down the list. Get all of your relative frequencies. Now, since each one of these represents the percentage of the total 50 data points that each class represents, this sum here needs to be 1. If we were to add all of these numbers up, equals the sum of these values, it should add up to 1 or 100%. And we see that it does. The next column in our list is something called cumulative frequency. Cumulative, if you ever taken a final exam or taken a midterm exam and you've asked, you might have heard teachers say that your exam is going to be cumulative, meaning it's going to cover everything up to this point in time. Or your cumulative GPA versus your semester GPA, which means your cumulative GPA is taking all of your GPAs previously into account. Same concept here. We're talking about frequencies, and we're talking about how many data values have occurred up until this point. So for our first class, how many total frequencies have occurred? Well, the answer there is very simply 6. We've had 6 occurrences of data values. But when we get to the end of the second class, we have the 6 from the previous class plus the 10 new ones, new occurrences that have occurred. So the answer here is really just going to be 6 plus 10. If you want to do this the fast way, we're going to type in equals the previous total plus the next number and hit enter, and it gives us 16. We're going to drag and drop that equation right down the list. Now let's think about it. Our next number here should be the previous 16 plus the new 13 occurrences, so we should get 29. So when we drag this down, we got 29. So we know that we've set up our equation correctly, and it's adding the previous total to the next number of frequencies. And if we did this correctly, when we get all the way down to the last one down here, it should be 50 because all of our data values have occurred by the time we get to the end. So we'll go ahead and drag it down to the bottom. And there we see our final number there is 50. So that's our cumulative frequency. Reason for all these columns is because there's a lot of different ways you can set up different types of charts to display your data. And these different types of columns will be used for different types of charts. The one we're going to use the most is going to be frequency and sometimes relative frequency. Things like midpoint and class boundaries have to do with how you set up your x-axis. Okay? So we've covered midpoints and relative frequencies, and we've found the midpoints, relative frequencies, and cumulative frequencies for our chart, and we could see, this is example number 2, we could see this is our data, here's our classes that we set up, frequencies that we found, our midpoints match up, our relative frequencies match up, and our cumulative frequencies match up. So we're in good shape so far. Now we're going to talk about creating this frequency histogram. It's really just a bar graph with some certain properties to it. The horizontal scale, that's the x-axis, is always quantitative, numeric values that calculations and comparisons can be done with, and it measures the data values. So in our case, we're talking about minutes of internet use. So our x-axis is going to be time in minutes. The vertical scale of a frequency histogram is always labeled as frequencies, how many occurrences fall into each group. And they have this rule here that consecutive bars must be touching. At this point right now, our class goes from 7 to 18. The next one starts at 19. If you put that on a bar graph, there's a gap. There's going to be a little small space, 1 unit wide, between the bar from 7 to 18 and the next bar, which starts at 19. So we want to close up that gap. And the way we do that was with this idea of class boundaries. Basically, it just is the idea that we are going to stretch our classes out half the distance so that they meet up in the middle and we don't have the gap there. So the easy way to do that is look at the distance between the two classes. 19 minus 18 is 1, and divide that in half. And that's how much we're going to stretch each class wider. So the easy thing to do here is all of these numbers here, 7, 19, 31, all the way down to 79, those are going to get half 0.5 smaller. So we're going to type equals, we're going to click on that 7, and we're going to do minus 0.5 because we're going to stretch that column in our bar graph when we create it out to the left, and then hit enter. And just drag and drop, and it'll repeat that calculation. One thing I didn't want to do is I did not want to format all of those as red in color. Over here, we're going to take this 18. We're going to stretch that 18 a little bit bigger. So we're going to take that 18, we're going to type equals that number plus 0.5. And it goes to 18.5. Now, here you go. Now our new class, it goes from 6.5 to 18.5, and our next one starts at 18.5, which leaves us no gap on the chart when we build the chart. We'll just drag and drop that down. And again, I want to highlight this bottom one in red because that number is important. So we've created our class boundaries, and if we go back here and check, you will see that our class boundaries match up perfectly with the ones that the textbook found for this example. So we're in good shape. All we're doing is stretching that class a little bit wider, half a unit to each side, so that our columns will meet up on the chart. Okay, now what a lot of people struggled with a little bit was the actual part of creating a histogram. Step one is just going to be to highlight the data set. Okay. Step two is going to be to click the chart icon and select histogram. Step three is going to be to, I'm just going to put number 3, make it a little smaller. Adjust bucket size to 12, because that's our class width. And 4 is going to be to set minimum and max values to 6.5 and 90.5. And I'm talking about, in that case, the horizontal axis. So you'll see as we go through these steps exactly what I want you to do. Other than that, step 5 would just be to clean up titles and labels. All right. So step 1, highlight our data set. Our data's over here. Go ahead through and highlight all of this. On back up here. Now, on my screen, because I have it zoomed in a little bit so it's more visible, you can't see the chart icon right away. But if you're zoomed out to a normal zoom, you would be able to see it. So I have to click on more here. And right here, it looks like a little bar graph. It says insert chart. That's what we're going to click on. Now, don't be alarmed. It randomly chose a chart type, and we're not going to use that. We're going to go ahead in here to chart type, and we're going to scroll down through here, and there's lots of types of things you can make with Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel or any spreadsheet platform. If we get all the way down here under Other, we'll see there is an icon here for histogram chart, and that's what we're going to click on. And it gives us this chart. And this chart is okay, but it's not exactly what we need. We take a look at our x-axis here, and we can see these numbers don't match up with our classes or our class boundaries or anything like that. And if you would count your frequencies here, they don't match up with the frequencies we had. It's because this hasn't been set up to what we want it to do. So we're going to click on, up here at the top, we're going to click on Customize. And we're going to go to Histogram, and we're going to open that up, and the first thing we see here is bucket size, and it automatically chose a bucket size for us. So we're just going to highlight that, and they give us some options. We're not going to use those. We're going to type in the number 12 because that's what we calculated was the class width that we should use, and we're going to hit enter. And already we can see that it did change our histogram somewhat. Okay, so that's step one. And step two, we've highlighted our data, we've clicked on the chart icon, we've adjusted our bucket size. The next thing I want to do is go down here to horizontal axis. This is the next important thing. We can see a minimum and maximum value in here. For those, we want to use our lowest class boundary, which was that 6.5 that I highlighted in red. So we're going to put that in. And our highest class boundary, which was the 90.5 that I also had highlighted in red. And once we have those in, now we can look at our chart here and see 6, 10, 13, 8, 5, 6, 2. It matches up with what our frequencies were when we created the chart ourselves. Everything else we're going to do now is really just cleaning this up a little bit. We can go in here. You can do it either way. You can do it from over here by going to Chart and Access Titles, or you can see as I go on to this, it highlights it. We could just click in there, and we're going to title this Internet Usage. Other things we can do under chart title, I don't like it being left aligned, I like it center aligned. So we'll center align it. I want to bold it. Maybe I want to change the color, make it a little darker. Maybe we want to make it more specific of 50 adults. Okay, we can go down here. We can, well, you can't really see it on the chart because of the stuff that's down here. So chart title, let's go ahead and down here to horizontal axis title. Okay, we know that that is time in minutes. Again, we can center it. Looks like it is centered. We could change its color, make it a little darker, whatever you want to do with it. Make it bold. Okay, next one we have to do is over here. We can go in here and change it to vertical axis, or we could have just clicked on this. And what did we say? Our vertical axis has to be frequency. Has to be. All right. Really nothing else we need to do here. We've got a title. We've got our axes labeled. We've got the correct number of classes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. The frequencies for those classes are correct. Our x-axis right here is labeled by our class boundaries that we calculated. This is a good histogram. If we go back and look at the pictures of the ones they had here in the book, ours matches up perfectly with this one here on the right. There are two ways that you can do an x-axis. You could label it by midpoints, or you can label it by class boundaries. For using Google Sheets, labeling it by class boundaries is the easiest way to do it. Okay, so we've got this here. We're done with everything. We're going to close it up. We can move this chart a little bit so we can see everything else that's on here, and we can maybe zoom it out so we can see a little bit more. You see that we have all of this information here. So there we go. We took a data set, calculated a class width, calculated class limits, went through and counted off our frequencies, calculated our midpoints, relative frequency, cumulative frequency. We calculated our class boundaries so that our bars on our graph will meet. Okay, we went through the steps, we calculated, we found our histogram. I hope that clears up some of the questions that people had. And I'm going to add 2 more problems for you to try and complete tomorrow. And good luck, and I hope it works out.